Activities that involve thinking and problem-solving skills, observing, critical reasoning, analyzing, and drawing conclusions are key skills in thematic assessment. As a structure for integrating content areas, learning around a theme makes sense to learners. This helps them make connections, to transfer knowledge, and apply it to their own experience. You may subscribe and like for more sessions and updates. A theme creates a context for learners to see the meaningful applications of the academic knowledge and skills. When learners can relate what they learn to the real world, they will understand and retain the new knowledge better. Phase 3 is about designing theme-based authentic assessment materials. These materials to be designed will serve as reference for learners in accomplishing the tasks. This session will focus on familiarizing the steps in designing theme-based authentic assessment materials. This phase will also discuss the different parts of the performance guide sheets to be followed, including assessment tools and rubrics, which will be used by teachers and learners. And lastly, to share reflection on the relevance of appropriate tools in thematic assessment. During the first phase, 4 steps were being done: the review of the competencies, content, and performance standards, the finding of common grounds in the elements of the curriculum guides, the aligning of contents and tasks to arrive at the expected learning experience, and the finalization of the learning experiences in every learning area. Then step 5 to 8 focus on selection of appropriate themes where learning areas and other experience revolve, then the grouping of learning areas where learning experiences flow across the theme, then the connection of the experiences to thematic bases, and the finalization of activities and outputs that learners will do as evidence of their performance. The next step goes with designing theme-based authentic assessment materials. This will focus on the development of performance guide sheets for learners, including its assessment tools through the rubrics. These 4 steps will help teachers design learners' materials from preparing authentic performance guide sheets, developing scoring rubrics for authentic performance and outputs, including the quality assurance of the learners' materials and packaging of the learners' assessment packets. Step 9 will guide teachers to prepare the authentic performance guide sheet for the learners' assessment materials. This step will allow teachers also to list down activities and steps that learners will do, including resources needed and expected learning experiences. In designing thematic performance guide sheet, teachers must see to it that listing of activities must be understandable to all types of learners so that they will be guided without confusion on the different instructions. They also must spell out or provide specific step-by-step procedures so that students can have the chance to check the itemized instructional steps in doing the different tasks. Teachers must also consider that instructions and steps must be easily understood by learners with different comprehension levels. Words to be used must be simple and clear so that learners can do the task without even the assistance of learning facilitators. Just like any learning activity materials, this performance assessment guide have its parts. These parts will allow learners to understand the purpose of creating the outputs or products. This will help them deepen the essence of the theme that were integrated into the tasks and the learning experiences. The parts start with a theme where teacher developers will describe briefly what the theme is all about and the thematic experience where the learning process revolves. It will also list down the competencies in all learning areas so that users will be guided what competencies were expected. Final learning evidence will also give a brief description of what is the general expected output. Teachers might include sample illustrations or pictures of the expected learner's output, especially if teachers see that learners may find it difficult because they haven't experienced yet the tasks that will be required. It is also very necessary to include the list of all essential materials, tools, and equipment needed in the performance output to help learners achieve all the needed expectations in the performance tasks or outputs. Procedures will tell the specific and detailed instructions that will allow parents, learning facilitators, or learners must do before, during, and after the accomplishment of the performance output. This is where step-by-step procedures or processes to be undertaken by the students in the accomplishment of the performance output will be enumerated. Lastly, the scoring rubrics will serve as guide for students in understanding the performance targets, as well as criteria that will help teachers in making consistent and objective judgment on the quality of learners' work. Step 10 will be the crafting of assessment tools and rubrics. To clearly indicate achievement criteria across all the components of any kind of learner's work from the thematic assessment, teachers must use rubrics to provide structured performance criteria about different levels of performance on the assessment tasks, outputs, or products. The use of rubrics can help learners generate and justify assessments, thus allowing them to take more responsibility for their own learning. This template for the scoring rubrics is part of the branding of PAG-ASA. This highlights the use of competencies to directly see the target measures, the learning experience as one of the bases in the measuring of learning outcomes, the performance criteria, which tells us what is intended to be measured, and a description of performance to guide teachers and learners on what is expected to measure. The performance scoring looks into the proficiency level of learners' achievement with the corresponding and prescribed scoring points that is friendly and fair for learners. The designing of rubrics is one of the most critical considerations in thematic assessment because teachers must consider fairness and objective judgment in scoring. To give due credits to the outputs and products of learners, analytic rubrics will be used by every learning area in grading the required performance tasks in a quarter. The first is the use of analytic rubric, which will focus its evaluation on the skills, the learning experience, and the content or the message that are coherent and connected to the ideas presented. The highlight of this PAG-ASA credits that every performance criteria is equivalent to one performance task in a grading period. When scoring with an analytic rubric, each of the criteria is scored individually. The first portion that the rubric will look using analytic is the competency, where it requires learners to show the expected skills. This example will help us understand that when teachers design the assessment materials, competency should take its maximum consideration and that learners must see to it that competencies required must be shown in the outputs. The second consideration of the rubrics is the learning experience. This measures how well the learners understood the competency and be able to translate the competencies into learning experiences. This is one of the highlights of PAG-ASA since this will focus on how well the learners apply their understanding of the content and the performance standards. The third consideration of the rubrics is the connection of the ideas in the message and the content of the output. This focus on how well learners organize the content in a specific learning area and were able to connect both the skills required by the competencies and the expected learning experience. for this performance assessment, one output of the learner will be critically evaluated using 3 performance criteria, where this criteria is equivalent to 3 performance tasks in a quarter. This is one way of strategizing to lessen the multiple performance tasks to be required from learners, considering that we are recently on academic ease. The second one is the use of holistic rubric, which contains the evaluation of the whole output or the major final evidence, considering the 4th performance task and bears the highest points. This holistic rubric will focus on the general creativity, innovativeness, originality of style, and values it puts into the output or products. The values as well investigates the connection of all the outputs to the theme. The use of holistic rubric with all criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together, such as clarity, organization, and mechanics, will base on overall judgment of the student work. The rater matches the entire piece of student work to the description on the scale. This will emphasize on what the learner is able to demonstrate based on the outputs, products, or performances presented. In designing both analytic and holistic rubrics, we need to make sure that performance criteria indicators must be quantifiable. These quantities will allow teachers and learners to understand specific requirements of the outputs and the specific targets the competency requires. When we give generalized statements and targets, it will add confusion to teachers on the scoring of outputs during the evaluation and may confuse also our learners as to what specific targets the output requires. We need to establish clear and specific requirements to guide our teachers in evaluating and guide our learners in accomplishing the required tasks. To summarize the scoring, the score of the student in the analytic rubric for every subject area is equivalent to 3 performance tasks in the whole quarter. And the score of the student in the holistic rubric is equivalent to the 4th performance task in the entire quarter. Step 11 is ensuring the quality and alignment of the learner's material and its assessment tools. Quality assurance is an important part of the assessment process. This QA process will provide feedback to the development teams that contributes to the quality of the developed materials and the assessment designs. This process is making sure that all elements and contents are aligned to the learning goals and outcomes. Step 12 is the last step where teachers will organize the learner's assessment materials to be ready for the assessment activity. To wrap up session 3, the following activities will be done. Prepare the authentic performance guide sheet for learners, develop a holistic and analytic scoring rubrics for the authentic performance, quality assure the performance guide sheets and assessment rubrics, and finalize the packaging of the learner's materials for actual assessment. To close this session, we must believe that assessment has an important role in education and it has critical role in the teaching process. In an effective classroom, students should not only know what they are doing, they should know why and how they are doing. You may subscribe and like for more updates and sessions.